Thank you, Dr. Das. It was a pleasure to meet him when he had been to Chennai, and we had a good round of discussions. And it was also good to know the kind of work MRC is doing. And I'm happy that I'm able to be present to you this day. And I'm also happy to see that Devlina presented before me, because just 2 weeks back we shared the stage together in the National Maritime Foundation when there was the workshop, Cake and I first workshop, where both of us were in the panel. So it's good to again see her presentation, and also the presentation made by the IIT. I just mailed, right? His name was I forgot his name, but the presentation on and why seaweed is also very important right now as an compensatory or alternate for aquaculture. Having said that, let me just give my background. I'm basically a marine biologist. I have my master's in marine biology and oceanography from the Center of Advanced Study in Marine Biology, Porto Novo, and I have a PhD in marine biology through a Danish project fellowship that is called as Tropical Marine Mollusk Program. Basically, I'm a taxonomist, meaning to say that I work on species naming, and I specialize on coral reef invertebrates, including mollusca, polygid worms, amphipods, and so on. So I look at the smaller organisms very, very closely, and I also look at larger cetaceans, like be it dolphins or whales, and we do have some work on that. And prior to joining, this is my 10th year with the National Center. I'm there in the center right from the time it was instituted. It was in 2013 that we recruited people, and I'm there from the beginning. And I have just jumped one rank more. I joined the Scientist D. I'm a Scientist E. I head the conservation of marine resources department, and we do a lot of conservation management planning, and we help all the state governments and UTs for their conservation related issues. And we do help in the preparation of coastal management plans for all these coastal states and UTs. And we help the ports, we help the defense, we work with Coast Guard. And when the coast is there, our jurisdiction lies between 500 meter from the high tide line and up to 20 nautical miles. So this is our jurisdiction. Beyond that, the Ministry of Earth Science takes care. And this is in a nutshell about myself and the work that we are doing in the center. And I go as resource persons to many institutions, and I like working and interacting with students and researchers. So without wasting much time, I will get into the details of the presentation I have for today. And this is called as the ecologically sensitive areas. Please permit me to share my screen. So the first slide that you see in front of you is the slide that says that from 21 to 2030, UN has declared as the year of, or a decade of, ecosystem restoration. Now, the saddest part is that it's very difficult to restore a system that is degraded back to its original glory. And what UN or the countries who are party to it are trying to do is that at least try to protect what is remaining and try to propagate in the areas where degradation has taken place. Because of the abuse that has happened to the environment, we see that whatever steps we take does not bear fruits as expected. What was in the past, like what systems we had in the past. So whatever is there right now, it is high time for us to protect and conserve. And this is just the 17 SDG goals that we have. And being a marine biologist, my focus will be always on SDG 14, which talks about life underwater. But interestingly, even if I talk about SDG 14, SDG 14 is never solo. It's always interconnected. If I go into details of SDG 14, you see that both SDG 13, SDG 15 all plays and are interconnected. And then when we start interlinking everything, you see that ultimately the entire SDG will be supporting each other. So having said that, it is important for us to also look at what kind of environments that we have in the nation and what kind of legal provisions are available in the country regarding the protection of ecology sensitive areas. Now, this slide is a slide that gives you a glimpse of what work in the last 9 to 10 years NCSM has done. So we have demarcated 78,000 square kilometers of hazard line for the country. Now, this hazard line is not a regulatory line. It is a line that is an informative line that tells you areas or parts where if any development is going to happen, we have to give a second thought to it. If there already exists structures there, then we have to see how they can be shifted or how the people can be shifted from that place. And the second important study that we did was demarcation of coastal sediment cells. And through the study, we observed that there are 26 large sediment cells. Now, what are sediment cells? Sediment cells are basically areas from one point to north or south, where the sediment starts to move within these cells. And there are 26 sediment cells across the country, and 10 of them on the west coast, 16 on the east coast. And interestingly, these cells, we call them as primary cells. It is further simplified into secondary sediment cells and also as management unit, which is at the very micro level, probably a macro level, not exactly micro, but at that level. But the third most important study that we did was mapping of 34,127 square kilometer of ecologically sensitive areas as given in the 2011 notification of CRZ. Now we have the 2019 notification of CRZ, where you see that slight changes have been made to the entire notification. It just didn't stop with the mapping of 34,127 square kilometers. The notification also said about 12 critically vulnerable coastal areas, what we call the CVCA, which has to be demarcated and accepted in the CZMP. Now, if you are aware of the coastal states and the UTs, they all have a separate agency called as the SCZMA, the State Coastal Zone Management Authority. Now, for Maharashtra, we have the Maharashtra State Coastal Zone Management Authority. And what the authority does is that any activity, be it development, be it conservation, has to be brought into the notice of the authority, and the authority will decide whether these are valid or not, and these are mapped for long-term developmental or long-term conservation or long-term livelihood, disaster, whatever the management issue is, that for that it applies. So these three were the most important studies that we had done as an institution in the last 9 years, and all these are now translated into the different coastal management plans and also the protected areas within the country. Now, the CRZ1 areas, as it is called, is the ecologically sensitive area. And this is as per the notification in para 2.1.1, which is brought in 2019. 11 was the original notification. And it was the first time, though there were sensitive protected areas mentioned, A to K, these 11 systems were brought into place in the notification. Now, I'll just move on to one by, probably when I move to the later slides, I'll tell you how these are divided into ecosystems, as habitats, as protected areas, as nesting grounds, and so on. And what happened was that when the CRZ 2011 notification came, there was no policy, there was no specific inputs for identifying, delineating, demarcating these particular ecological sensitive area. The notification just mentioned that mapping of ESA has to be done, as you see in the point ABCD, and there has to be a framework that has to be developed for as criteria for development of these ESAs, and then again a framework to develop the framework and criteria for developing the CVCA was done. And finally, there has to be an integrated management plan that has to be prepared for the ESAs, for the CVCAs, and management plans for the ESAs. So these were all given the notification, and this work was assigned to NCSCM. So now why all these confusions? The confusion is mainly because, so this was the SDG slide I was talking about, how the SDG goals are interconnected from 14 and so on. And then I just told this is the three important work that was carried out, that has taken place in NCSCM: the demarcation of hazard line of 70,000 square kilometer, demarcation of coastal sediment cells, which is 26 in number, and then 34,127 square kilometers of ecologically sensitive areas, and 12 CVCAs. So this is the CRZ1A areas, and I'll just tell you the science behind conservation, because what we had done earlier was that we just took inputs from a species like tiger, for example, try to protect the tiger habitat, a particular X species, then try to protect the habitat, or if it's a mangrove area like Sundarbans, protect the areas. But we had to have some kind of strategy to develop evidence-based, science-driven conservation. And that's exactly what we did for the ecological sensitive areas. Now you see three oval shaped structures here with mentioning what kind of strategy of current strategy we have in conservation. First is the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, which includes both including the species and also the marine protected areas. And there are two kinds of conservation. One is spatial, that is area-based conservation, and one is very specifically species conservation. Now, under the area-based conservation or spatial conservation, we have the national parks, sanctuaries, conservation reserves, and community reserves. Whereas in the case of species, we have four schedules. Schedule 1 invites the strictest laws and regulations because these species are highly endangered as per the IUCN conservation norms or as per the wildlife protection, the endangerment of the species of a particular state. That is based on the species conservation. And then we have the Environmental Protection Act, which was brought out in 1986, which also brought in new protected areas like the ESZ, Ecological Sensitive Zones. Now, this has recently gotten a lot of attention because Supreme Court has given an order that any protected areas there, be it a sanctuary or a conservation reserve or a national park, from the boundary of that, there has to be an ecologically sensitive zone that is demarcated. For many of the protected areas, these ESAs were not available, and now the Supreme Court has told that if the state does not have an ESZ for a protected area, 10 kilometers from the area as buffer will be default given. So now all the states are rushing up in such a way that to find out whether 1 kilometer or 2 kilometer or 3 kilometer buffers can be made. That is the importance of ESZ, and suddenly in the last 2 years it has gained lots and lots of momentum because of the Supreme Court and because of NGT's pressure to all the states to get this done. And we also have the ecologically fragile area, EFA. That is, for example, in the case of Maharashtra, Dahanu and the North Palghar district. You see that there, Dahanu, there is a separate DTEPA, Dahanu Taluka Environment Protection Agency, that is formed exclusively. So this is also one of the methods under the EPA how conservation has taken place. And then we have the wetland, rules and management rules, that is in 2017. Then of course now the ESA, which is mentioned under the CRZ1 and under the ICRZ is nothing but the Island Coastal Regulation Zone. CRZ for the mainland India, ICRZ for the islands. And then we have the Biological Diversity Act, where again we bring in spatial conservation measures and species conservation measures. In spatial conservations, we see that areas of biodiversity heritage importance have been identified. It can be a heritage, archaeologically important site, heritage site. These are also mapped and brought under conservation. And if you see in the species conservation, what happens is that there are various regulatory provisions, and also the Biodiversity Act also discusses in detail about the access and benefit sharing of the local community. If something is harvested by some industry, it has the locals have to have some kind of an royalty for that particular activity. And in ESA, as I tell, it is purely evidence-based, and from that we have created the highly stressed zone and CVC. So I'll be talking today only about the ecological sensitive areas because that is a very vast subject. Has the slide changed now? Can you see the framework for ESA?
Yes, sir.
Great. Okay, then no stopping from here now. So basically, when we started to develop the framework, it was not a very easy task because we had to start from the scratch, and we had a lot of consultation process. Like, we prepared a draft criteria within internal experts, and then we called for an expert consultation. Then we validated with existing data. This is in close association with the respective forest and environment departments at the wildlife wing in Delhi, the Wildlife Institute of India. We had IISc Bangalore. We had the CMFRI. We had in School of Social Work in Chennai. So many organizations were involved in assessing the conservation value and then ultimately developing a particular criteria. And if you don't believe, for ESA, there are 4 categories, of which 15 criteria were shortlisted. In that, 34 attributes, characters for data for 34 attributes were carried out. And interestingly, it was the first of the kind because we used state-of-the-art technology available in 2014-15, which means that we took a tab, we developed our own program, and entire socioeconomic data analysis is done in the tab. And once the entire socioeconomic, because the tab gives you a geotag location of the person whom we're interviewing, it gives with the person's consent, whether he can take a picture, put or a thumb impression, or even the name, just put them again based on consent. We take the inputs, and then all the data is entered yes, no, what are the questionnaire is there. And once the enumerator gives enter, next second the data was coming into a server. So it was very fast work that was done, and so many thousands of household surveys are carried out for the first time in the country. So as I told you, can you see the slide now? Ecosystem habitats.
Yes, sir.
Great. Okay. So I introduce you to the 11 CRZ 1A areas, which are called ecological sensitive areas. So of the 11, first four are the ecosystems. That is the mangrove ecosystem, coral ecosystem, seagrass, and salt marsh ecosystem. Now, salt marsh was a very neglected area in terms of conservation, but we in our study have brought salt marsh, and these are now legally demarcated, and these are ecological sensitive areas mapped in every coastal zone management plan prepared at the state and the UT level. So this is something very important. We see how science, which is evidence based, which is driven by science, is going into policy, and how conservation works. Now the basic, and down you see that there are habitats, that is the bird nesting, turtle nesting, horseshoe crab. Now there's a difference between ecosystem and habitat. Ecosystem is basically an entire area that supports all life, and when we consider ecosystem, we include both the abiotic and the biotic factors. In the case of habitat, like the bird nesting or the turtle nesting horseshoe, we see that the animal spends only a part of its life cycle to visit. I'll come to it later. Okay. Mangroves, for example, we have solid mangroves, the biggest mangrove we have, good stands of mangrove we have in Andaman Nicobar, undisturbed till now. Sundarbans, world's biggest mangrove area. Sundarban name itself comes from the Heritiera foams, a tree called Heritiera foams, which is Sundari, and that's why Sundarbans is called so. So this is shared between India and Bangladesh, and the largest part is found within India. Unfortunately, the Sundari trees, the quality of Sundari trees and the density of Sundari trees is slowly declining because of the lack of proper fresh water flowing higher from the Ganges River into the Sundarban region. That's mainly because of many dams have been built, water is used for agricultural purposes, water is being diverted for various other activities, and we see very little fresh water coming to the shore. Mangroves live in an area which is an intersection between the complete marine area and freshwater area, and they have a brackish water nature. And you know that mangroves are halophytic plants and trees. They have a very special adaptation roots called as the stilt roots or pneumatophores or nemathods or pneumatothorns and so on. And these are very specially adapted to live in this area, and these act as nursery grounds for many fin and shellfishes. All the young ones, the shrimps, the fishes, the prawns, everything develop here and then go into the coastal waters. Corals are the most important ecosystems that you see and highly sensitive to climate change. We see that even 2 degrees of increase in temperature can bleach the corals, and throughout the world we see the mass bleaching events happening. We read last year in Australia how mass bleaching completely wiped out the branching species of corals, which is under genus called Acropora, and we had a severe loss. And this year is also now identified as an year of ENSO. ENSO means El Nino and the Southern Oscillation. So we are going to see a very high temperature rise, and God only knows what's going to happen to the corals. Again, these corals are two types: the branching corals and so the reef-building corals and the solitary forms. Reef-building corals are like the branching corals, the tape corals, table corals, and so on, cup coral and so on. And then we have the massive corals as seen in the picture. This is the brain coral, Meandrina. So these are the other ones which are again, these act as important feeding and breeding grounds for many fin fishes and shellfishes. And third is seagrass. Again, we must be thankful because India has all the systems. What in the northern hemispheres, when you go to the northern 45-degree north latitude and above, or 45 south latitude and below, you see that there is absolutely a minimized diversity. Whereas we see from the tropics, from the equator to 0 to 30-degree north and south, you see that the beautiful huge numbers of species diversity obtained, which you do not see in other places. So what is the importance of seagrass? So seagrass, basically, you can ask what is the use of seagrass. Again, seagrass plays a very important role in carbon sequestration. In fact, when we say terrestrial forests, and when we compare mangroves and seagrass have 5 times more sequestration capacity than what the evergreen forests and terrestrial forests have. So protecting that's what they call as blue carbon offsets. And salt marsh also plays a very important role. because they also act as very important barriers. In fact, all the four, mangroves, corals, seagrass, salt marsh, they are the primary defense against any kind of natural disasters like sea level rise, tsunamis, or any other storm surges. Even for cyclones, you see that mangrove has been protecting. And if you ask the people of Tamil Nadu or people of Andaman, just because the presence of mangroves, when the tsunami came, they were all completely protected. So they play a very, very vital role, and that's why protecting them and it's very important. Then next we see the habitats. Habitat, as I told you, that they have only animals living there have only a part of their life cycle completed there. For example, birds, they come only to nest once the hatchlings are becoming chicks, and once they're becoming juveniles, they're capable of to fly, then they move from there and they come next year for nesting. If we see in the case of turtles, and this image that you see is an olive ridley, scientifically called as Lepidopteles olivaceae, and this nests in all along the coast of India. But the great mass nesting, what we technically called as aribadas, in Spanish means arrival, and we also call them rookeries, is found only in the Gahirmada Rushikulia belt in Odisha, and this is the single largest nesting rookery or aribada in the world. Nowhere else so much. This year again, in aribada season, just 4 days back, it got over. There were close to 7 lakhs of turtles nesting at the same time. Just imagine, you cannot just put your leg and walk. That was the kind of intensity in which the nesting is happening. And again, interestingly, what happens is that the females are the ones which come to nest. They'll come on one side, they'll come from the left side, dig the nest, and drop the eggs and go on the opposite side, on the right side. So that's exactly what they follow. And also, scientists have proven that these female turtles have something called fidelity, meaning to say that they will come to the exact place where they were born, and they'll come to the exact place every year to lay their nest and go. So this is again very important. And then the third habitat is the horseshoe crab habitat. Interestingly, horseshoe is a name given not to a crab here. This is actually an arachnid, meaning to say that this belongs to the family of spiders and scorpions. If you put them upside down, you can see a lot of jointed appendages because they come under arthropoda. Arthropoda itself, Latin, it says arthro is jointed, poda is foot, jointed foot. So these horseshoe crabs are of very high importance in medical biological field and medical field because it contains a blue blood called LAL that is used for treatment of cancer and for many cancer-related research. And we must thank again God for the two species that we find in India from Andhra Pradesh, north of Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, and in the West Bengal. One is called as Carcinoscopus rodenticaudatus, one is called as Tachypulus gigas. These two are present in huge numbers. And again, these come only to the shore to lay the eggs till hatching happens. When the larva comes, they go back into the water. So again, only a part of the life cycle is in the sandy or muddy areas of the beaches which are found in Andhra, Orissa, and West Bengal. It is called horseshoe because the horses and even ox, for example, you see that you put the nailings and you put the U-shaped structure or the metal structure so that the hoofs does not get damaged. Since it looks like that, scientists have given a common name as horseshoe crabs. And after that, we have two geomorphological features, which is the sand dune and mudflats. Again, these two play a very important role in minimizing wave intensities, and they minimize wind intensity. And interestingly, sand dunes are very, very important. But sorry to say that many of the sand dunes have been unscientifically planted on top with casuarina plantation, which casuarina itself is an exotic species brought from somewhere else. And these dunes are slowly losing its vitality and strength and vigor. And now we see that in the case of Odisha or Andhra Pradesh or Tamil Nadu, these large plantation of casuarina on dune vegetation has caused erosion of the dunes and loss of dunes. Again, mudflats, we see that when you look at it, you see that it's biologically dead. But once you dig inside, there are lots of polychaete worms, a lot of nereid worms, and a lot of shells, bivalve shells that are present inside. And these are very important areas for the migratory birds and wading shore birds to come and feed. And once they feed, automatically for every action, there's opposite and equal reaction. They feed, they have to defecate. And they defecate in the form of uric acid, which contains high content of nitrogen. Now, if you recollect your school's, basic science, the three important fertilizers required or elements required for fertilizing the fields are nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And these bird droppings are highly rich in nutrients, especially in nitrogen. 80-90% rich in nitrogen. And you see that during high tides, the droppings are washed back into the coastal waters, and you see that this became fertilizer for the phytoplankton. Phytoplankton is fed upon by zooplankton. Zooplankton is fed upon by nectin, and then you see the entire food web growing and growing. So the most fishery point of view, the richest, diverse, and productivity point of view, highest species and numbers you see only in the coastal areas. When you go to deeper water, you hardly see any of these present. So mudflats are also very important. Besides that, we also have the heritage sites and article sales also marked as ESA, and we also have the marine protected areas separately, which are brought under ESA. So this is the exercise that was done by NCACM, our own institution, and I told you there are 34,000 square kilometers mapped. So these are the details of the mapping. 1,400 square kilometer of corals, 500 square kilometer of seagrass, 600 square kilometer of small salt marsh, 5590 or 1 square kilometer of mangroves, and 3,500 square kilometers of mudflat, 325 square kilometers of sand dunes, and 179 square meters of turtle nesting sites, 70 horseshoe crab, 5,380 bird nesting sites, and other important archaeological and protected area. Of course, the protected area is more than 16,000 square kilometers, mainly because of all the wildlife sanctuaries, the biosphere reserves, the conservation reserves, the other areas that are present. So when we did the work, it was not NCCM doing it alone. We took inputs from many of the national institutions because we wanted to have a validated data. At the same time, we wanted everybody in the same page, because what data we are creating for the nation should be not a data that is having a lot of doubts and lot of data discrepancies, or having some kind of displeasure among the multiple stakeholders. That's why many institutions, like for example mangrove, the space research application center, we also even interact with Forest Survey of India. For coral reefs, we have taken the space application center again for validity. For sand dunes, we did ourselves. For seagrass, we did ourselves, because we had some scientists who had specialization exclusively on that. And like that, you can see how Archaeological Survey of India, Wildlife Institute of India, IISc Bangalore, ZSI, SACON, Sullivan Center, Ornithol, how all the institutions were roped in to undertake this very important work. And after this work was done, this work maps were prepared and shared with respect to states. And every state incorporated this into the coastal zone management plan that they prepared. A draft plan was prepared. The plan is always to be hosted in the environment or forest website, whichever the SPMU is, for 45 days, and it should be available for public view. And after that, there will be a public grievance, or public committee that public come and discuss and share their grievances, and after that only these maps were published. So based on 2011, the entire country, every state has published, including Maharashtra, because Maharashtra go very tough states to work, because of the complexities, because of the population, because of the kind of development that has taken place indiscriminately along the coast. And now we see that in 2019 we have the next set happening. Odisha is the first state to finish 2000 based on 2019, whereas all the other states are slowly in the process of preparation. Interestingly, Maharashtra has finished for 5 districts, and the rest of the districts they are going to work out. So this is a very important exercise that is required in terms of the ESS being mapped. So I'll just skip these slides, because this just gives you a purview about all the protected areas available in the country. There are 870 protected areas available in the country, of which 131 are marine. In marine protected area, 106 are present in Andaman Nicobar itself. So that's something very interesting. And these are just, again, the names of the different protected areas that you see all over the country. So when we prepare the CRZ map, this is the quality of the CRZ map. What you're seeing is 1:10,000 scale, but what actually we prepare is 1:4,000 scale, which is crystal clear. And the states are the custodians of all these sensitive maps, because these maps were not prepared alone by NCSM. We took Survey of India into page, and we were in the same stage working together. And you see how all the 11 ESAs are mapped. But if you go to a particular coastal zone management agency, you can download all the maps free from, or you can copy paste the maps from every coastal zone management authority. If you're going to do some research in future also, you can take the maps available. They are grid wise. and they're available. Only thing is that they will be available in 1:25,000 or 1:10,000 scale, which will coarse in structure. And also, what map I'm showing you now, the CRZ1A, will not be as different colors like this as given the legend. It will be one green color, because it's very difficult to qualitatively and quantitatively mention them in the maps given to the public, because it is highly sensitive. Whereas if you want to do any refined research, you are most welcome to approach the states, Coastal Management Authority, to get the high resolution maps, provided they give it to you based on deliberation with them, and you have to defend why you want that, and ultimately they'll be able to share. So on the left is from the Gulf of Kutch area, and also Gulf of Kambat, and the right you see is from the Bhitarkanika and South Odisha area. So as I told you, now this is, for example, I've taken a snapshot of the coastal zone management plan, one grid shot, map shot from Tamil Nadu state. This is based on 2011 map. So I told you that in the previous map, you see that multicolors were there, each indicating a particular ESA. Whereas in the map, you can see only green colors. So green color are the eco sensitive area. But what ESA is there, only the state, which is the custodian of all the sensitive data and maps, will be able to tell you. And since we spoke about maps, let me give you some importance of maps. Now, what you see, the island here is not an island that is Andaman Nicobar or Lakshadweep. This is very much in West Bengal, and this is called the Shagor Island. And this has got a very important ashram called the Kapil Muni Ashram, where during festival season, this small island has more than 10 to 12 lakh visitors coming, in the span of time. So here in the island, we try to map the mangroves. So individually, every ESA can be mapped. You see the mangroves are here, and what we do is that we take this map in hand, prepared by GIS experts. We do field validation, and when we do field validation, you see that we also capture the species that are present there, and also geotag the locations. For example, you see the key locations down: Kastala, Mandirtala, Narahirapur. So like that, we maintain maybe, and there will be database with us. We will maintain the current status of these particular ESAs. The second map that you see is, I told you about the horseshoe crab. So this is single species of horseshoe crab that is shown here. This is probably Tachypulus gigas, and then this is how the habitat looks. They live in mudflat areas and also in sandy or muddy shores. And again, this is a mangrove area. Within the mangrove area, you see how these mud crab, horseshoe crab habitats are there. So this gives us a very clear picture when you go to the field what ESA is there, and this becomes a base for any manager to make his management studies. So when I go and talk to a district administrator, or when I go and talk to the secretary at the level, when I make an infographic as such, see how the maps are translated into an infographic. That will give us very clearly a view of what I have in my area, what is missing, what I have to mitigate, what I have to implement. So the manager, for any conservation, for any disaster, for any livelihood, for any shoreline, they'll be in a position to take the right decision without wasting much time, at the same time giving a science-based derived management plan. So this is the salt marsh I was talking about. They become totally red in color during the summer seasons, because the presence of fresh water will be less and salt will be there in the mudflat, on the mudflat, the salt marsh areas. And these are specific halophytes. We have some grasses. There is a wild rice. The Potracia, what you see on this is a wild rice that is even consumed by the local communities in West Bengal and in Odisha state. I told you about the blue carbon, how each of these corals, mangroves, seagrass, salt marsh play a very important role in carbon sequestration. There are values calculated for each of these ecosystem by NCACM, and it's available in our website. And for detailed information, probably I have to write to the expert. The website contains information of all the scientists and their specialization. Having said that, these are just infographics again, which talks about the goods and services that each ecosystem provide. Corals, seagrass. Since there's time is very short, I just wanted to run through them. This is for mangroves. This is for salt marsh. So every kind of basically based on TEEB, millennial classification, we have 4 important sectors. That is the cultural, cultural, and then regulating, provisioning, supporting services. So all revolve around these 4 services, and I've just classified them. Since the PPT is being recorded, you'll have an idea of that. So what are the opportunities that arise when this kind of mapping, this kind of delineation, this kind of protection, and this kind of exercise is done by every coastal state in UT. First thing is that these are lines of defense. Mangroves are lines of defense. And since we are talking about mangroves, I'm also happy to say that our Honorable Finance Minister has announced the scheme of Mission Mishti for mangrove conservation for 2,000 crores. And I'm very happy also to share that it is from our institute that the guiding document was prepared, and we are still working with the ministry, with the Director General of Forest, and we are trying to pick in the base. So mangroves, corals, seagrass, salt marsh, all of them have very important coastal protection. They are the primary defense, and because they are protected, if they are protected, then we'll have a sustained ecosystem service that is provided for them. People depend on that. For example, honey, wild honey is collected from Sundarbans, right? And it supports lots and lots of wildlife. In turn, wildlife protects and keeps the environment fit, and nature takes care of itself. Because the ecosystems services are there, probably healthy ecosystems should come the prior to sustained ecosystem services. Once healthy ecosystems there, then we see that our resources are intact and protected. Good carbon sequestration happened. We talked about seaweed culture, how seaweed can carbon sequester though it's a short period of culture during that particular. But one thing is that it is not a stored carbon. That's the only thing. It is a spent carbon. That's the only difference. And we have enhanced fisheries. That is because of protecting these ecologically sensitive areas. We have enhanced biodiversity because of the protection of these coastal areas, and which are ecologically very sensitive. And it also leads to conservation of the entire ecosystem, or even a flag species, as in the case of the dugong, which feeds on seagrass, or a keystone species such as the oysters and the oyster reefs that are formed in many of the brackish water areas along the entire east and west coast of India. More than all this, it is a traditional knowledge that plays a very important role, and community participation. That's why I told you that I talked about ESA. There's one more component called as critically vulnerable coastal area, CVCA, where the community itself has to manage their mangrove areas and make sure that protection happens.